Right. And okay, we're live. We're live, or at least live at the moment, because this is pre-recorded. This is a video on the Sun Eater series, Christopher Ruccio's Sun Eater series sci-fi books, and the Lesser Devil. I have it here, and that's not the most important today. The most important is that I have Sam with me from Isamwise. So welcome very, very much to the channel.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's good to be here.
Yeah. And today we're going to talk about the book. So we assume that you have read the book or that you are not afraid of spoilers, I think,
That's right.
because it's very difficult to talk about this
Yeah.
without just talking about the plot. It's very short, let's say. But since you are here, Sam, and my viewers usually watch only when I talk. This is the first invite to the channel, so it feels very good to have Philip was here, right? And then authors, other authors. Philip is an author too, so I should,
Yeah.
yeah, you have to remind me about that now when he has written 3 books or something. But you can present your channel a bit and also talk about why Sun Eater is exciting for you and how much Sun Eater you've read.
Sure. Yeah. Well, my channel's Isamwise, and let's see here. I mostly talk on my channel about it's books, but kind of cover books from all over the place. A lot of science fiction and fantasy, but I really like books that are from, especially in the sci-fi fantasy vein, that are kind of from the pulp weird tradition. So, in terms of like modern authors, like Stephen King is probably the most famous, although he's not my favorite from that tradition, but I really love the work of Gene Wolfe. And then I've been reading a lot of Tim Powers recently. And so, yeah, a lot of what you'll see on my channel is either just general book content or reviews or discussions of like different ideas from them. And part of why I love the videos that Shrikant makes here is I like talking about things from a spiritual lens as well. My, for what it's worth, my faith tradition is predominantly Christian. Although I'm happy to learn more. I feel like I need to give my credentials here because you're so well spoken on this. My professional education is I have a bachelor's degree in biblical ministry, so that's some of where this comes from. Is like, oh, I love thinking about this type of thing. And then I read as far as Sun Eater goes, I read Empire of Silence coming up on almost 2 years ago. Right, like I read it right before Daniel Green and all these big book reviewers did, and it really hit big. So kind of was like riding that wave. So yeah, and then I'm up to book 6 right now, so ready for book 7 when it drops later this year. And it's a series that's meant a lot for me. Like just on a superficial level, like it's fun, like lasers, space Romans fighting like these 12-foot tall alien vampires, is awesome. But on a deeper level, there's a lot of things about suffering and enduring suffering and making sense of hardship in the universe, about man's place in the universe, and a lot of interesting things that Rockio plays with in the series that I like. And I know this doesn't work for everyone, but the way that he discusses these ideas in the context of greater science fiction. So, kind of contrasting things with Dune or contrasting things with, I mentioned Gene Wolfe with the Book of the New Sun. I like that actually. For some people, they complain about that, but I think he does it really well, and I really enjoy that about the series. So, and it's been a while since I've read The Lesser Devil, so I had to catch up yesterday. I mentioned to you, put on the audiobook and listen to it while I was out working. But I liked this one better on a reread than I did the first time. The first time I was like, oh, it's all right, and this time I was like, oh, there's some great juicy bits in this book, or in this. He calls it a novella. Really, it's just a short novel. But yeah, that's me and my Sun Eater thoughts in brief. So
Yeah, good. Nice to hear. And it's a novella, and it's I think 120, 160 pages, this
yeah,
version at least. So quite a quick. I'm a slow reader. Maybe I realized that. I don't know. I read very slow,
Hmm.
very detailed and slow, and really immerse myself in things. Maybe not the booktubish way of reading, but I think it works. And I think especially with Rucchio, I think his prose is very beautiful and can touch you very deeply, even though it's a lot of action. And if you who are watching don't know about these books, there are reviews on Empire of Silence and Howling Dark on my channel, and I'm
Mhm.
sure maybe you have some Sun. I think you have interviewed Rokyo as well,
Yeah.
Sam. So please watch his channel too for Sun Eater material. I think that would be great. Um, in contrast to you, I'm a new sci-fi reader, so I'm reading mythology and fantasy. That's
Mm.
my bread and butter, and philosophy. So a lot of philosophy. And then I don't know how I started to read Sun Eater. I think it was a follower on the channel who recommended me to read Sun Eater. So I
Mm.
started to read that and became really engaged in Hadrian Marlowe, which is the main character in his struggles and story. And I think it evokes a lot of feelings on, at least for me, it's personal, but my own journey, taken a lot of decisions, very
Mhm.
happy with what I've done, but in retrospect, you can think about what was right and what was wrong. And I think the journey of in the Sun Eater has that kind of vibe and feeling to it. Um, I'm going to just short summarize Lesser Devil.
Yeah.
And this, if you haven't read this book, you can listen to this summary, but then you have to turn it off. Basically, it depends on what we're discussing, but just for safety,
Yeah.
just turn it off and come back when you've read Empire of Silence and Lesser Devil. But this is about Crispin, the younger brother of Hadrian. But since Empire of Silence, it has now, I think this is in the middle of Empire of Silence, but it's still 30 years into the future, if I'm correctly understand this. So Crispin is not young anymore. He's a bit older, and he also has a sister
Mhm.
now. She's in the 20s. She's called Sabina, and um, so Crispin has in Empire of Silence. It's obvious that Hadrian and Crispin has a very tense relationship, and they don't like each other. At least it seems so on the surface. And in Sun Eater, you get the only the perspective. The Poe character is only Hadrian, but in this novella, you get Crispin's, which is very refreshing, I think. He is together with his sister Sabina on a journey. They're going to see Lady Kephalos, a relative. She's dying, but they are warned by his father that might be attacked or killed. Something might happen. So they leave from Devil's Rest, and they go up in space, and they are attacked, and they have to land dramatically, and they land in the middle of nowhere, as I understand it. And there they meet a Catholic or French Catholic Christian group, and they don't know who attacked them, and they don't know who this group is. It's a totally new group for them. So the book revolves around this mystery. Why did this happen, and who
Mhm.
attacked them? So very short summary, and you might want to add something, Sam, as well. So
Yeah, I guess I'd say like if you've read the series, you know it's set, thousands and thousands of years out into the future. And so most of Earth's major religions that we know today have largely disappeared and are only kept preserved in these, they almost call them museum groups. So there's like museum uh, Buddhists, and I believe you mentioned Hindus as well. And this is like the museum Catholic group. So most people with like the state approved religion of the chantry, that's what they believe in. So for Crispin and Sabina, this is sort of like a new experience. They've never met people who believe a faith that maybe we today would be more familiar with, or at least have heard of.
yeah, great. Um, there is a lot of focus on faith in this book, so this will be very interesting to discuss.
Mhm.
You told me about your Christian background. So
Mhm.
I have a mixed background. That might not be obvious from my channel, but I'm short story. I was adopted to Sweden from India, and I grew up in a Protestant Christian family. So I
Mm,
growing up in that quite well, going to church and everything. And then I
yeah.
went back to India, returned to roots, explored Hinduism. So this book was actually interesting because
Mm,
he met someone who is very Christian. So for me,
yeah.
but I would like the idea is to listen to your thoughts, Sam. Then I will share mine, and then we can explore themes, and we'll see how many themes we have time to explore. But we will start there at least. So, what is your impression of the book, and what are your thoughts?
Yeah. Um, that's a good question. So I think for me, when I read it the first time, just kind of read it as a short space adventure story, with you said like an interesting mystery at the heart of it. Um, Rereading it, I I on a reread, I know more about some of the because I say I come from a Christian background, but I'm not explicitly from a Catholic background.
Hmm. Hmm.
So some of that has been stuff that I've needed to learn, and like I said, it's interesting to learn about other traditions, whether they're explicitly Christian or not, that are just different in how they think about things and how they process the world. And so one of the interesting things on rereading it is there's some nice gems that Christopher hides in this book that the more familiar I've gotten with Catholicism, the more there have been interesting things to pick out. I think for me, the heart of the story, is Crispin, and it's not like he has some big character arc where he's a radically different person by the end of it, but it's almost like an arc by degrees, where he comes from a culture that at least Catholics would call pagan. It's very much modeled after Rome. So you think even in the description that you described here, you could take that and put it in like that plot idea and put it in an episode of like HBO's Rome.
Hmm.
Think of the nobleman and his sister, and they're traveling to, across the barbaric wilderness to go visit relatives, and then they get attacked and have to go hide with like the locals who are going to defend
Yeah.
them, So
Yeah.
there's the space Rome analogy comes out more in this. And
Mm.
so you have Crispin, who comes from that culture, who by the end of it almost seems to be more embodying the ideal of self sacrifice that the priest and the other people from this group have been presenting to him the whole time. So,
Mm.
yeah, I don't know. That's at least my initial first takeaway about his arc.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think the different views we might have from a faith perspective can be interesting to explore. And also the thing with Rome, I actually have it here, looking at in the bookshelf here, the
Mm,
HBO series. I really enjoy that.
mm,
Um, that's something that maybe it's not so apparent in if you only read Lesser Devil.
hmm
If you would do that, maybe I don't think people will do that. It's not so apparent. So it's maybe from when they are talking and the titles and things like that and the
Yeah.
structure, of course. But I can add some things to the themes that I thought was interesting in the book. One thing I've talked about is or wrote about is the brotherhood,
Mm,
or now it's his sister as well. But Crispin is inferior to. He feels inferior. He has bad self-confidence, and I
yeah.
think that that's something that is explored in this book, and also the aspect of faith and Christianity, because he gets a lot of Christian messages like everyone is equal and you shouldn't take up arms if you maybe you shouldn't do it at all if I
hmm
interpret the Abbey correctly here. He comes from a very hierarchical society where genetics plays an important
Yeah.
role. So it's like a cultural clash for him here.
hmm
Um, so that is a few things I take with me. So he is on a. It's like a cultural clash for him, and when he meets these Christian people, which I think he. It feels like he doesn't like them in the beginning. In Empire Silence, I had a very bad picture of Crispin. I don't know what
Right.
you think about that. Think
That,
about
I
that.
mean, that's for sure. You get. I mean, you only see Crispin through Hadrian's point of view, and
Mm,
even in this book, Crispin says, Hadrian's much more eloquent than I am. He knows how to handle these situations. And so the impression you get of Crispin from Hadrian's point of view when he's young and dumb in the first book is that Crispin's almost like a big lunk, isn't very
Mm-hmm.
smart. And here you see, like, no, Crispin has other qualities to him too. He might not be as well spoken. He might not always have a snappy comeback. But like he really does have a strong moral center. And even if a lot of that has been influenced by his culture, you mentioned, a strong emphasis on genetics and people being better simply because of who they've been born as. Um, he still like wants to do the right thing. And so when he sees a better way or when his beliefs are challenged, he's willing to entertain that and listen to that. And there's almost I don't know how you would say it, like a certain amount of teachability that's a part of his personality. And maybe some of that comes from him being a younger brother. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe that's part of a Roman aspect, at least if we talk about HBO's Rome, the idea of the nobles to look down, because it's called the
Mhm.
plebeians here as well. So there is obviously
Yeah.
connections. And also later in the book, when yeah, we can talk spoilers when he meet Olorian, when they realize who's done this.
Mhm.
She doesn't respect the people he's protecting or who's working with him. So there is
Yeah, that's
this
right.
kind of elitism in the book that goes like a red thread that he's
And she's like, "Were
challenged
they?
by.
Are they important? Like, what? Like, what's your deal, man? Like, are these, high nobles that you're protecting? Yeah, it's their aunts, to
Mhm,
her.
mm. Yeah. How do you perceive it as a? I mean, you talked about a little bit about your Christian background, but you
Mm.
don't. You're not a, as I said, I don't know. I don't. I just interpret that you're maybe not active and things like that, but you have that background. But how do you read the book in a certain way? Do you think because of that, and how do you regard the values of Crispin?
Sure. Yeah. Well, there's definitely, like you said, this is of Christopher's work because I think Christopher's pretty open about his Catholic background or his
Mm,
Catholic faith, and of his work, I think this is one of the ones where uh, he signposts that the most, just because you've got Catholic main characters, so he's
mm,
probably drawing from some of his own background with that. Um, and so as a part of that, you get things like you just in regards to my background, like one of the bits that
mm,
cracked me up is when Christopher's speaking with the priest and the priest is offering him some whiskey and Crispin's like a little hesitant at first and the priest's like, don't worry, the Baptists have been extinct for 15,000 years, no one's going to judge you, which
mm,
is funny because I didn't come. I'm not a Baptist, but
mm,
I'm familiar enough with their views on alcohol that cracked me up. And then Crispin's like, "Well, who are the Baptists?" And the priest is like, "Oh, they're ancient heretics." I'm like, "Good one, Christopher." Um, so there's things like that that are not winks at the camera, but like if you're familiar with a little bit of interdenominational squabbling, like
mm.
you'll get some jokes that are there. Um, I think here's to me the most interesting element that I think Christopher ties into this book with the symbolism of it all, which is, and I completely missed this on my first read. It was only on my second read through, and it is the image of the Catholic saint of Saint Christopher. So I don't know how familiar you are or your viewers will be with Saint Christopher as
You
a
can
saint.
tell us a bit about
Yeah,
him.
so
Mm,
Saint Christopher is, in terms of Catholic saints, you've got like the ones who like absolutely are like historical people that they like revere, and then some are like, that sounds a little mythical. We're not sure if this person actually
mhm,
existed. And Saint Christopher lands more in that camp.
mm,
But he's I don't want to be disrespectful and call him like a mythological character, but he's of that type. He's like an archetypal figure. And he's to summarize his story very briefly, he was a warrior who wanted to serve the greatest king. And he would serve one king, hear that a king feared somebody who was an even stronger king, would leave that one and serve another one. And the story goes that he found the strongest king, served him, and then heard that the strongest king feared the devil. And so he decided he was going to serve the devil. And then, as he was serving the devil, learned that there was one thing that the devil feared above all, and that was God. And so he decided he was going to serve God. And so that's how St. Christopher goes from being like this evil figure, who's
Mhm.
sort of a warlord almost, to serving the Almighty. And the weird thing is, and this isn't with all representations of St. Christopher, but with a lot of them, is he's represented as almost a werewolf. He is a man with the head
Mhm.
of a dog. So
Mhm.
he's this monstrous werewolf type figure. And so I talked about this a very little bit in my interview with uh, Christopher Rocchio, not Saint
Mhm.
Christopher.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
right.
yeah, but he's the phrase that they would use to describe
Mhm.
him is he's like an apotropaic image.
Mhm.
So the idea of like a gargoyle, the monster that you put on the outside of the church to scare off other monsters. And so there's a lot of Saint Christopher, the dog-headed saint,
Mhm.
all throughout this book. They've got carvings of Saint Christopher, on their church. He mentions as he's going through the gate, there was the picture of a warrior with the head of a wolf. Okay, well,
Mhm.
that's a reference to Saint Christopher.
Mhm.
And all that to say, that's sort of who Crispin becomes by the end of this, because he's like his image is a devil, so
Yeah.
think like that's usually an evil, like demonic figure, but he's a devil who by the end of the book is fighting for the Christians, fighting for this small group that's under attack. So
Mhm.
he's like the devil that fights on your side. It's like an
Mhm.
apotropaic image. So sorry, that's a lot of
No,
rambling
that's
from
good.
me,
That's
but
good.
like that, when I saw that, I completely missed the St. Christopher stuff the first time I read this. And then this time
Mhm.
it's like, oh, look at that. That's so cool. So,
No, that it's good that you elaborate, so no problem. Uh, I really, this is interesting to me because I'm grown up in a Protestant Christian
mm,
family, and so all the saints, are unknown to me. We have a
sure.
few saints, one saint in Sweden, it's Birgitta. It's Birgit, maybe in English. I'm not
Mm,
sure. She was, um, she became a saint, and there
mm.
is a monastery in the county where I grew up. So I've
Okay.
been there. And so, but I'm quite, not familiar with the Catholicism
Hmm.
in that sense. I read it in school, and then I know a lot of just Protestantism, both in Sweden and in Germany. Um, but for me, this book is a kind of a revisit to Christianity, and it's first it was a bit uncomfortable for me. I have no
Mm,
problems. My wife is Christian, and so on. So, and I have the Bible and everything, and I like the stories. But as it was presented in the book from the Abbey, it was like a cultural clash for Crispin.
mm,
And there's a lot of Hinduism that is, I would say, egalitarian
mm,
in a way, but it's honestly it's more hierarchical than Christianity,
mm,
at least in theory and sometimes in practice too. So I was, yeah, I was a bit, surprised. I was started to think myself when the abbey was talking and speaking, even if you can find that kind of spiritual words in all religions, unless you include politics and things like that. I think, my personal opinion. Um, so I think the things you are talking about, the saint, and is interesting because that's a layer I don't have
mm.
because I don't know the stories. I know Rocchio is a Catholic. I understand he's a strong Catholic. I mean, he has a strong faith.
Hmm.
Um, and it's, I mean, maybe less devil. Might feel more obvious that it's a story about Christianity, about the faith. And the values and different parables. You say, right? So
Hmm. Yep.
things like that. But when you read Empire of Silence, and I'm halfway into Demon in White now, it's not so, you could say, black and white. I'm not sure
Yeah.
you if you agree on that.
Yeah, I'd say so. I think there are elements of it as an archetypal story that Rockio plays with the deeper into the series you get. But it's not like you have and then, Hadrian went to this planet and he met Jesus, who said, like, so
Mm.
there's nothing like that. It's very much on, um, it's kept on like a symbolic level. So I think there's stuff there for people who share his faith or are interested in it, that they'll
Mm.
get stuff out of it, but it's certainly not didactic, or preachy or anything like
Mm.
that. And of anything, you're right. This is the one where it's the most, it goes from being on a symbolic level to being in the text itself.
Mm.
Um, so yeah.
Yeah, and some of the since I'm raised in the church, I don't know what it's called in English. Confirmation is called here. It's
Yeah.
Protestant. Yeah, so you do it when you're 14 years old. You confirm your faith. So I've
Hmm.
done that, and then you get words from the priest that the priest thinks suits you. So when I read Lesser Devil, I had to check the Bible to see what the words were, because it was almost like this abbé was a kind of resembled the priest I had in church,
Hmm.
for example.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I think that's interesting. Another thing I think about, and I'm not sure, because in Empire of Silence we know that, or I maybe I'm wrong because I'm only halfway through. I start to doubt, but who has written? It's his own account, Empire of Silence, Hadrian Marlowe's account. But in Lesser Devil, it's written by Rucchio. I mean, it's everything is
Hmm.
written by Rucchio.
Yeah.
Rucchio. Who's talking? Who's telling? I don't know if you have been thinking about that. The
Yeah.
story.
I mean, it's a third person, narrative.
Mm.
It's not like somebody recounting their story.
Mm.
So it says Crispin went here and Crispin did that. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I don't know that there's an intended in-world author. To me, it's just read as like a story that
Mm.
Rocchio was telling. So yeah, I didn't uh, get the impression of an in-world author, which a lot of people, and I don't know what your take on this is, but a lot of people seem to be very skeptical of Hadrian as an author, and I don't know if they're just used to people lying to them all the time, so they think Hadrian is making stuff up or exaggerating things. But a lot of people tend to be very skeptical, and so it's interesting to read. Something like this, where because you don't have an explicit in-world narrator, it's more just the story being
Mm.
told to you. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but yeah.
I'm not sure. I think it's changing a bit in Demon in White now. The narration.
Hmm.
Maybe it was more narcissistic in a way.
Hmm.
Telling about all the good things, that everyone else was wrong, he was right, and
Hmm.
he did good
Mm-hmm.
decisions. I think now now that he starts to reflect a bit on his own journey. Was it right? Did I do the right
Mm-hmm.
thing? Should I have done it in another way? But that makes me, since it's an Empire of Silence, read about Crispin first.
Yeah.
I think I doubt maybe the descriptions from Hadrian there, especially with this book. Still,
Yeah.
it's a third person, so but still, if we have the idea that someone has written, it's difficult to know whom to believe, or if it's the Abbey story. I don't know. That would be interesting in a way.
Yeah.
Um, but Hadrian, he's very complex to me,
Mm-hmm.
and I like his he struggles and that he thinks a lot. So I think he's very human. I don't think I dislike him or like him so much. I think he tells a story from a very human perspective. Yeah. So I'm not so divisive when I read about Hadrian. I can
Sure.
get annoyed about his decisions, especially when I started to read the Empire of Silence. But now I'm thinking more like, yeah, maybe he did that, maybe he didn't do that, maybe there were other reasons for doing things. I start not to believe him so much. So I think maybe I feel more sad for him.
Hmm.
So it's a very sad story in a way, I
Yeah.
think.
Well, maybe that's actually one, because you mentioned the narration, and maybe that is actually what came to mind is there actually is an element of that that's similar to Empire of Silence, which is, or to the Sun Eater series at large, which is in Empire of Silence. Hadrian tells you, um, you know, the official story is that I was hung as a traitor, that I like committed this genocide. Well, I'm going to tell you what actually happened. Okay. This
Mm,
is what you're not going to read in the history book. So let me tell you my story.
mm,
And at the end of The Lesser Devil, um, Crispin and his sister are returning home and they're told, yeah, none of this is going to get told. They're going to wipe it under the rug. Nobody's going to tell about this. So there almost is an element of still that same thing from the main Sun Eater books of like, well, you're getting like the real story of what really happened here in this book because this is never going to get publicized because they don't want the in
mhm,
world reasons
mm.
they don't want House Marlowe to look weak. So I guess there is a similar thread there that I hadn't noticed before.
Yeah, and maybe that's I'm because I'm reading Demon and White, at the same time. So always reading a few books. That's a
Mm.
curse and a blessing, I think. But so I switch between the two narrative voices, you could say,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
then it becomes very obvious what the similarities and differences.
Hmm.
One difference is the maybe not so interesting, but still might be the pacing of the novella is. I mean, it's bigger books. Empire of Silence, so it's obvious. It's one big book, maybe. But I thought it was a lot of more action. It was more action packed than
Mm.
at least what I've read so far. Maybe not the end of Howling Dark is, last 200 pages or something is action packed, I
Yeah.
think. But I think it took up more space. The action. Maybe that has to do with Crispin and he's not thinking too much. I'm not sure.
Sure, sure. Yeah, that may be because it's probably like what the last half of Lesser Devil is like kind of the foot drops, and then you get small reprieves from it. But I mean, it's basically that to like the end of the book.
Hmm. Yeah, and then you have the theme of revenge, which I thought was interesting. It's tied to brotherhood
Hmm.
as well, but also Lyra, right? Or Lauren, Lyra or Lauren. She is on a mission for revenge because she attacked. So there is this kind of proving yourself in this book about, I think, self-worth and um, you know not being good enough
Hmm.
in a way. I'm not sure if you reflected on that
Yeah, no,
way.
that's good. The part that I reflected as far as the whole revenge aspect to it, um, actually like sort of ties into some of the spiritual stuff, which is there's a word that it's only used a couple of times in the Bible, but it's not the most common word out there, but it's very precise, which is why it's used. And the word is that it describes Christ as being the propitiation for our sin, which is a big, three-syllable word that means a sacrifice to appease a deity. And
Hmm.
so when talking about I'm sorry, I forget what's her name, the revenging lady,
Lyra.
Lyra. Yeah. So when she comes and her revenge is both towards House Marlowe, but then because this small village has gotten involved,
Mm,
they're caught in the crossfire as well. And so Crispin, when there's a moment where he realizes he can do something about it, offers himself up as, to use the word again, the almost a propitiation, both to like save the village and as the taking on the punishment for his family as well. So when I
mm,
talked about like Crispin, who comes from this pseudo Roman, the Catholics would call it pagan culture,
mm,
takes on a similar type of position to Christ, which is the ideal that he's been presented with as he stayed in this village, which is, being the willing sacrifice to give yourself up to save those that you care about, which I thought was interesting. So you have that similar idea of the sacrifice to placate
mhm.
in this case, vengeful Lyra, but the idea being a vengeful deity.
But he also is forgiving to her
Yes, yeah,
but
that's
in the
true.
end. I mean, in the final discussions of that she can escape and so on. But she has
Yeah.
a pride not doing like that. There is also a thing in the end that I'm curious about your thought that I think has a strong spiritual connotations because it's the Jean-Louis Abbé, I think it's called Abbé. he's offered the opportunity to get the Palatine status, and
Mm.
I'm not sure. Maybe I'm overinterpreting this, but I understand that Hadrian and his people has almost eternal life, and they
Yeah.
can, yeah. So, and he says first, he says, "No, I don't want to do this. I don't want to turn against God and
Hmm.
things." And then he changes his mind. We get to know he has changed. But I thought this. Yeah, I thought I haven't, come to a conclusion with that, but it was very strong to me. He gets an offer from Crispin, a very elitist offer to, rise above the ranks and get eternal life and
Hmm.
get fixed for life, you could say, as well, if you get diseases and anything. And he
Yeah.
said no, because he values life and his faith.
Hmm. Yeah. That's a bit because I remembered that from my first read through, and that's one that I'm not sure what to think of because on the surface it almost looks like a deal from the devil, which is ironic because that's Crispin's symbol is
Mm,
is the devil. So you think of people who like at least the archetype of making a deal with the devil is like, oh,
mm,
so that I never die. So, I sell you my soul and then I live forever.
mm,
So it almost seems like something similar to that. But then you're right. He goes back on it. He's like, no, actually, and I think it's because the priest counsels him, like, no, actually, I want to take this. And maybe it's simply for the pragmatic reason of he thinks he can do like more good than harm,
mm.
and that he can both serve his people better by being elevated this way, but also help protect and serve others as well. Because it may have been it may have, I'm trying to remember because some of the villagers run together in my
Yeah.
memory. So I
Mm,
think it was you said it was John Louis.
mm,
I believe it was him where there's a moment where because you talked about at the beginning, there's a question about violence, non-violence, how that plays
mhm,
into these people's faith as well.
mm,
And Crispin asks, I think it's John Louis when they're kind of like
mm,
arming up to go, and defend the village, and
mm,
he sort of asked the question of like, man, but like if your soul is at stake, like, are you willing to do this? And he replies that he will gladly go to
mm,
hell if
mm,
if it means saving all of the people here, which is both very like Huckleberry Finn of him, which I don't know if you read Huck Finn, but there's the moment where he says, well, if slavery is the right thing, then I'll go to hell instead. Like I'd
mm,
rather choose that. So it's very
mm.
Huck Finn of him, but also like once again, it's kind of embodying the Christ ideal as well. So if that was John Louis, then there's a similar
Yeah.
element going on there with that moment too.
Yeah, I think it could have been that too. I think I was thinking I had the idea that I'm a kind of peaceful guy. I think that all religions, more or less, at least in their core, has similar values. Not all, but there is something deeply spiritual that connects us, and that is expressed in faiths and religions all over the world. And then it becomes maybe politicized and so on, and you get conflicts and so on and so forth. When I read this offer from Crispin to Jean Louis, and he answered the first thing he answered. Then I thought, because in from a Hindu Buddhist view, you could say, and it's not only Hindu Buddhist, but
Hmm.
you can find it in the message of Jesus during Easter as well. So it's not so divisive at all. But everything is opposites. So if
Hmm.
you, yeah, if you to be happy, you have to be sad, and so on.
Hmm.
All these things, and to live, you have to die, and so on. When we are born, we know we're going to die. So
Hmm.
it's connected. So I was thinking his answer was very spiritual, refusing. But then I got a bit confused when he actually accepted it. But then
Hmm.
I'm maybe not so deep into Christian theology, so I can understand that as much, because there is this idea of course, eternal life and
Hmm.
heaven and hell and so on in Christianity, which is not so prominent it doesn't even exist, I would say, in the Hindu Buddhist. Some Hindu
Hmm.
branches there is, but not in the way Christianity seems more um, dualistic in that way.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So it made me think. That was one of the some long books. Sometimes you think a lot when you've read like thousands of Erickson pages or anything like that. But this was just a small book, and it made me think a lot of things
Yeah.
on faith, especially on my own faith, and also Crispin coming from this Roman, you could say Roman religious culture,
Mm.
because in Empire of Silence, Hadrian is called by Valka. I think she's calling him a barbarian, if I'm right.
I believe so. Yeah.
And in this, I'm not sure here. If we look at from a Sun Eater perspective, these are preserved cultures, by the empire has preserved this Christian group, but still Crispin is the he's the elite, and
Hmm.
maybe they are some kind of barbarians to him at least. I'm not
Yeah.
sure. So juxtapose, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think he calls them pagans throughout the book, which just like s- strikes the priest as being funny. So yeah, there's certainly an element of would you say using the term like barbarian or pagan to just see somebody as other, from a less
Mhm.
desirable group. So there certainly is something to that.
And I think since I don't know where this book is read, but I suppose it's mostly read in the Western world, so where
Mm,
Christianity is dominant. So it it can play some tricks with your brain, I think, when
mm,
even if you are not Christian, you're growing up in Christian countries, you are strongly affected by the culture and the values
right.
anyway, no matter what your faith is. So I think he's doing it very good, Rukio, too. So, I mean, some say I read some thoughts about Rukio and his writing, and I like his writing, obviously, but I think he blends this. It shows that he can blend action-packed, exciting writing with philosophical
Mhm.
questions without going too deep into them. He just mentioned something we all know: the Roman Empire, for example. It evokes feelings in us.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I know there's some people who you know everybody's taste is going to be their own, and there's some people who don't enjoy his writing, and that's fine, they can be
Mhm.
wrong. um no, but I really like you said, how he writes, how he blends things together. I think he brings honestly a lot of different elements that are really tricky to keep perfectly balanced, especially in the main books, but in something like Lesser Devil as well, where you do have more of that action focus. He still manages to make it something that's interesting, thought provoking, have little things that you can kind of pick out and that you'll be, at least for me, that I'll be
Mhm.
thinking about for a few days or longer afterwards. Yeah.
Do you have since you have read a lot of science fiction,
Hmm.
um, are there other authors that um, evokes this kind of feelings, or like Rukio does? If so, which ones?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, um, my first recommendation would be, and especially if you're interested in questions of faith and spirituality, and that tying in with science fiction and fantasy, like anybody who's seen my channel is gonna laugh when they hear me say this because I don't shut up about the guy, but would be Gene Wolfe,
Yeah.
and his
Mhm.
Book of the New Sun, especially. Which I don't have you read Wolfe at all?
I borrowed it last summer from the library, and then I was totally new. I read a bit of Rukio, but I'm
Hmm.
still, newbie in sci-fi, so I'm not that advanced. So I thought Gene was a bit too advanced for me at the stage. It felt like starting to read Erickson, I think.
Mm,
If you haven't, then people say that you exaggerate if you say it's difficult, but it's more complex, at least another fantasy. So
yeah.
that was the feeling when I read Gene Wolfe. I started to read it, but then I really didn't understand it really. So, I,
Wolf and
yeah,
Erickson get compared a lot. Yeah.
yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. No, if you bounced off like Book of the New Sun and you're still
Mm.
interested in starting his stuff, he has a parallel series that has some ties to New Sun, but can be read on its own just fine. And that's the Book of the Long Sun,
Mhm.
which is set. So, Book of the New Sun is set like on Earth, way out in the far future, like a million years into the future. The space empire days have already come and gone, and
Mhm.
kind of Earth is dying. And then Book of the Long Sun is set. It's not really clear where in that timeline it's set, but a group of humans has been moved off of Earth and have been moved into this big world-sized spaceship. So, like, if you've seen the movie Interstellar, at the end
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
inside this
Mhm.
big world-sized
Mhm.
spaceship. It's kind of a similar thing to that, and it's about this priest named Pterasilk who worships a pantheon of deities that may or may not be like artificial intelligences from computers in the spaceship. And they've been living on the spaceship for so long they just think it's the world. They have no idea that it's not a planet that they're living on, that it's a mechanical machine. And he's out playing ball with his students one day and gets a revelation from a god that he's never encountered before, and that kind of sets off this row of domino effects that creates a revolution and all this stuff with like exorcisms that come into play. So very much blending like religion with sci-fi in
Mhm.
that series. So I'm going to be starting the last book in his Book of the Long Sun series soon. But if you like this type of thing, I mean,
Mhm.
Wolf is my recommendation
Yeah,
for
I
that type
want
of
to
thing.
try him, but I thought it was a waste of time to start without getting feel for
Sure.
sci-fi. So that's
Yeah.
why I think also Rokio sells the book like that. It's a like an entry point if you have fantasy and sci-fi. If you read fantasy, it's a good entry point to sci-fi, and I suppose it's that as well. So maybe later, I'm sure
Yeah.
later try on Wolf as well. I have a here, maybe it's not a book for you. I don't know. It's Ada Palmer.
Oh, I've heard of these. Have you read
It,
them?
yeah, I'm not fully. I'm halfway through in this book, so I enjoyed. She has written a foreword. You say right?
Yeah. Yep.
For to some version of the new Sun.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was also a thing I thought maybe if I try to read her first and try to climb the ladder
Sure.
a bit, so maybe I can get to Gene Wolfe later. I enjoy this. It's very this is very different science fiction than Rokyo. This is more sci-fi. Do you say hard sci-fi or it's more technical sci-fi?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not the fantasy. It's not the fantasy sci-fi.
Have you been liking it so far, or what have you been? What's it
Yeah,
been
but
like?
I think it's because it's this is special because you don't know which gender uh, the person has.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So it's a bit confusing. I mean, that's maybe not the most important thing, but yeah, you understand your own prejudices, you could say,
Hmm.
in a way.
Interesting.
So, and then there is media in this world, so it's a like articles, so from and there are different viewpoints. And I think in fantasy, I would understand it very quickly because you know the tropes and you recognize stories. But
Mm-hmm.
so this is still a learning curve for me. So
Hmm. Okay. Yeah.
so
No.
we'll
I've
see.
I've had
Yeah,
yeah I've had To Like the Lightning recommended to me, and it's
yeah.
like, oh, that sounds interesting. I'm just I guess saving it for a rainy day at this point. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
I think you can get much more of it than I can. I'm still learning, and I'm a person who wants to know a lot
Yeah.
of things. So then I can get stuck sometimes, to do my own research on maybe more, maybe this has led me more to be curious on what kind of sci-fi uh,
Hmm.
literature are there out there, and then I've stopped a bit and tried to explore that a bit, and I will come back.
Yeah.
I rarely DNF. I almost never DNF something, but I can read very slow though, so
Sure.
so that's why.
Well, and maybe this is more of a silly recommendation, or at least some people will see it as that. I think this is very good. I
Mhm.
would say if you're wanting another thing that deals with some spiritual themes, ask some questions. Um, there are some really good Star Wars novels
Okay.
that
Mhm.
deal with this type of stuff. I would especially recommend the Star Wars books by Matthew Stover.
Mm-hmm.
So he has a novel, Shatterpoint, that's about, if you've seen the Star Wars movies,
Yeah.
Mace Windu, who's played by Samuel L. Jackson. This is a novel about him.
Mm-hmm.
And him sort of returning to his home planet. And it's sort of like the novel Heart of Darkness or the
Mm-hmm.
movie
Yeah.
Apocalypse Now, but
Mm-hmm.
with Jedi. So that one's a good one. But my favorite is Matthew Stover wrote the novel of Revenge of the Sith. Which you think like a movie novelization, that can't, and it's great. Like I
Mm-hmm.
did not think it was gonna be any good when I picked it up, and it is great. He like pulls in like elements from Dante
Mm-hmm.
into the book, which is interesting. I'm not super well read in Dante, but it was
Mm-hmm.
spelled out enough that I could pick it up. And uh, yeah, like I said, it's like Star Wars is definitely more like popcorny than say Sun Eater or
Mm-hmm.
Ada Palmer, which you were showing there. But
Mm-hmm.
for me, like sometimes I want just a light read that still has interesting things in it, but isn't gonna twist my brain in knots. So Matthew Stover stuff, I
Yeah.
think has some
Nice.
good questions
Great.
to it.
I'm not so popcorny at all when I read or the books I choose, but I, humbly accepted that in sci-fi I have to start from a popcorny
Sure,
perspective
sure.
to get into it. Um, Actually, I think there is a lot of relationships to mythology in science fiction. I mean,
Hmm.
Rukio is obvious how he writes and how he puts it, but I think I have here it's behind me. I have this is the Hindu epic Mahabharata, but this is a really
Mm.
popcorn version of it all. It's in
Okay.
blank verse because it's huge. But one thing I've been thinking about is that in Hinduism there is the called seers,
Hmm.
so they can see the future. Whether you believe it or not, there are predictions they made about space and how cosmos
Mm.
works that seems to not be so far from truth, even if it's not maybe the truth, you could
Sure.
say. So there is some kind of science fiction in mythology as well that ties into it. I don't know how acquainted you are with the video games and so on.
Little bit.
Yeah, I finished Starfield. It's a video game,
Mhm.
sci-fi game. You don't need to like the game, or you watch don't need to like the game either. But the end is now I'm spoiling this, so if you are playing the game, you should turn off as well. So, but the end is that you can decide if you want to embrace yourself with the something called unity. It's the
Hmm.
divine. You could maybe I don't know, maybe the divine. If you do that, you will be reincarnated, and you will
Hmm.
start a new life. You will start the game again, and you can do whatever you want. You have skills, but you have lost everything: money, progress, and so on. Or you can stay in the universe and not choose to be embraced by this
Hmm.
unity. So I think that that kind of sci-fi perspective to me, even if this was a game, is very interesting for me to continue to explore. And I think it goes both ways. This fantasy, sci-fi, mythology. There is something with this
Yeah.
that is connected, I think, and it's spirituality, then, of course.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned, Rocky plays a lot with it. That's one of the things that I do like about Gene Wolfe as well, just to bring him up again,
Mm-hmm.
is there's a lot of like mythology stuff that gets tied into it. And I mean, in some ways, like Star Wars is like it's a popcorny thing, but it's
Mm.
almost written as like a mythology. I mean, you think
Yeah.
of like in the West where it's consistently becoming an irreligious or atheistic culture, and yet at the same time when that kind
Mm.
of started in the 70s, like Star Wars becomes the biggest thing ever, and
Mm.
so much so that people get into arguments about what's canon with Star Wars, which is like a religious term.
Yeah.
So there's elements of mythology that plays with as well. But no, that's interesting. I haven't played that game, so I'll have to. I suck at video games. I'm
Yeah.
awful, so I'll need to get better at video games and then check
It's a
that
long
out.
game. All games nowadays are long, so it's easier to read. I mean, it takes shorter time to read a 10 series book than to play some video games. So it's something to remind yourself of. sometimes I'm just looking at my notes to see if something more I was. Um, no, but I think maybe this now I don't have so much time, but there is one thing that is in Empire of Silence too. It has to do with hierarchy. It's a hierarchy, you see. That is class or
Hmm.
class. I talked with Rookie about that, and he was maybe a little bit like, in the US, we don't talk about class so much. I'm not sure how it is in the US. In Europe, it's people talk about class,
Hmm.
at least. And I think that's very apparent in the all the books and in Lesser Devil as well, that this is elite. It's not only, this Roman elitism.
Yeah.
It's not only genetics, or what you call
Yeah.
spirituality. It's also the lowborn, you could say.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Well, if it's not talked about in America here, it certainly exists.
Yeah, I
um,
suppose it exists everywhere. So
yeah. Yeah. Even if it's not spoken of. Uh,
yeah, that's an interesting as well. Sweden is it's not Americanized because it has its very, very distinct feeling, but you could say that American culture is very well consumed here.
hmm.
So, 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 still there is. I mean, Sweden is very egalitarian,
Hmm.
relatively egalitarian society. The differences are increasing. So, without talking about politics, it's interesting to read still um, writings from American people or books by American people, because that's another kind of perspective, I would say.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we should round up, because I'm very happy you have visited, because you are going to work as well, because it's early morning for you in the US, and here it's after lunch, actually.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me on. This has been great fun.
Yeah, and I hear you have someone other grabbing your attention, right?
I
Um,
do. He just woke up, so.
yeah, but happy to have you here, and I'm looking forward to do more things if you want to do on the Sun Eater or on science fiction, maybe explore science fiction together, since you are more experienced as well than I am. So
Yeah, I'd love to chat again. Well, let's make it happen.
yeah, and thank you everyone who's watching. See you later, actually already this weekend, when I will review the Stone Wielder in Osmont Malasan book. And take care, everyone.